Beneath a stretch of grass where college football fans tailgate every fall, something 11,000 years old was waiting to shatter Egypt's claim to history's oldest monuments. Monuments are supposed to require farms, kings, and cities to build. That rule is wrong. Louisiana hunter-gatherers were already breaking it, thousands of years before Egypt existed. The proof of that almost didn't survive. Louisiana's own highway builders bulldozed the strongest evidence before anyone thought to test it. Archaeologist William Hague got exactly 3 days to prove a 5,000-year-old mound deserved to survive before the machines arrived. He lost. This wasn't a paperwork delay. It was the best evidence Louisiana had, gone before the science had caught up to it. That was March of 1967, on a stretch of land near the Baton Rouge airport, and the mound he was racing to save now sits under a highway, which brings us to the two grassy hills still standing 30 miles south on the campus of Louisiana State University. A 2022 study claims they are the oldest human-made structure in the entire Western Hemisphere. Louisiana's own state archaeologist says that claim does not hold up, and the strongest record might belong to the mound the bulldozers already won. The two mounds are not fenced off, not roped, not treated the way oldest structure in the Americas should sound. Students walk over them on the way to class. On football Saturdays, they climb both slopes with pizza boxes and flattened coolers, laughing, sliding, using them like a hill in a public park. Most of them have no idea what they are standing on. Officially, these earthworks sit on the National Register of Historic Places. Unofficially, they have spent decades absorbing foot traffic, erosion, and the kind of casual disregard reserved for scenery, not monuments. The mounds themselves sit along Dalrymple Drive, right in the middle of LSU's academic quad, two rounded hills of packed earth roughly 20 feet high, close enough to lecture halls that students cut across them between classes. They are not the first mystery here. Archaeologists had already been circling this site for 30 years before 2022. Robert Newman studied it in 1992. Jeffrey Homburg drilled soil cores through it that same year. A team returned in 2009 with ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, and a cesium vapor magnetometer, mapping the internal structure of the mounds without digging into them at all. Every one of those studies produced modest, defensible numbers. Nothing close to 11,000 years, which makes the 2022 claim even stranger. The same ground, examined by different tools across 3 decades, had never once suggested it was the oldest structure on the continent. Then, suddenly it was. That changed publicly, loudly, in 2022. A team led by LSU geologist Brooks Elwood, joined by paleobotanist Sophie Warney and several other LSU researchers, published a study in the journal American Journal of Science, arguing that one of the two mounds, known simply as Mound B, began construction roughly 11,000 years ago. This wasn't a fringe claim from an outsider chasing headlines. It came from tenured scientists at the same university that owns the mounds, built on years of fieldwork, drilling soil cores, and photographing the layered earth beneath the grass, inch by inch, down into the mound's interior. If true, that would make it the oldest known human-made structure anywhere in the Americas. Not close to the oldest full stop. Older than Stonehenge's earliest earthworks by thousands of years. Older than the Great Pyramid of Giza by more than 6,000 years. Built, according to the study, when the Sahara Desert was still a green savanna, when human beings were only a few thousand years removed from the end of the last ice age. The paper didn't stop there. Elwood's team argued the second mound, Mound A, was raised later, beginning around 7,500 years ago after a gap of use lasting thousands of years. And they noted something else, something almost too good for a documentary. Both mounds, they said, align with the rising point of the star Arcturus, a campus hill used for tailgating, potentially the oldest structure in the hemisphere, possibly built to track a star, Global media ran with it. Oldest structure in the Americas, older than the pyramids, the kind of headline that turns two grassy bumps on a college campus into a pilgrimage site for people who love unsolved history. News outlets across the world picked up the story within days, and locals who had grown up sledding down those hills on cafeteria trays suddenly found themselves living beside a global headline. For a moment, it looked like Louisiana had just rewritten the record books. Then Louisiana's own state archaeologist stood up and said, "Not so fast." Chip McGimsey, the state's official archaeologist, was not convinced by the 11,000-year number. Neither were several of the state's most experienced mound researchers. Within months, a formal rebuttal appeared in the SAA Archaeological record, co-authored by McGimsey, alongside archaeologists Rebecca Saunders, Jeffrey Homburg, Nancy Hawkins, Heather McKillop, and Rob Mann. Their argument was not that the mounds were fake, or unimportant or recent. It was narrower and more damaging, that the dating method itself might have measured the wrong moment in time. Buried in that rebuttal was a detail that should have made headlines of its own. McGimsey pointed out that Louisiana already has at least 13 other sites with earthen mounds built between 5 and 7,000 years ago. 13. Most of them ignored by the press, ignored by tourists, ignored by almost everyone outside a small circle of archaeologists. If the real record for oldest monumental structure built by hunter-gatherers in North America already existed, quietly, already proven, already published a quarter century earlier, then the 2022 headline wasn't just disputed. It might have been unnecessary. Somewhere in that list of 13 sites is a mound complex that broke the same rule that LSU papers claimed to break, decades before Elwood's team ever cored a soil sample on campus. And one of them didn't survive long enough to become famous at all. It was salvage excavated in 3 frantic days, then bulldozed. For most of the history of archaeology as a discipline, there was an unspoken rule about how ancient societies were supposed to work. First comes agriculture. Farming produces surplus food. Surplus food allows some people to stop hunting and start organizing. Organization produces hierarchy. Kings, priests, overseers. And only then, with labor to spare and someone powerful enough to direct it, do you get monuments. Quarried limestone blocks, dragged by organized crews under a pharaoh's command, raised the Great Pyramid of Giza around 2560 BCE. A hierarchical, coordinated society raised Stonehenge's stone circle around 2500 BCE. Egypt and Mesopotamia became the measuring stick for when real civilization, the monument-building kind, was supposed to begin, and for decades, no one seriously looked for anything similar on this side of the Atlantic, thousands of years earlier, built by people who had no state, no stone quarries, and no ruler giving orders. Louisiana was not supposed to be part of that story, not this early. The people living along the Ouachita River 5,000 years ago were mobile hunter-gatherers and fishers. No farms, no permanent villages, no pottery even. Small mobile groups moving with the seasons, following fish runs and nut harvests. According to the old model, people like that did not build monuments. They couldn't. They lacked the surplus, the hierarchy, the manpower. Then, in the early 1980s, a local resident named Rekha Bamberg Jones started looking closely at a patch of land near the Ouachita River that had just been logged. Before the logging, the site had been buried under timber for generations, its shape hidden beneath trees and undergrowth. Stripped bare, the land revealed something the forest had been hiding. 11 mounds, connected by ridges, arranged in a rough oval roughly 900 feet across. Some of the mounds rose more than 20 feet high. It looked deliberate, it looked old. Jones brought it to the attention of regional archaeologists, and by 1983 the site had a name, Watson Break, and a place in the survey record. For a decade, nobody could confidently answer the obvious question, how old is this? Then in 1993, Archaeologist Joe Saunders, working with soil scientist Thurman Allen, drilled into the tallest mound with a hand auger, twisting it down foot by foot under the summer heat, pulling up a narrow column of earth each time. What they pulled out wasn't just dirt. It was a layered record, clay-enriched soil horizons that, according to basic soil science, take thousands of years to form naturally. That single detail told them the mound wasn't a few centuries old. It was ancient, genuinely, uncomfortably ancient, for a site built by people with no farms and no permanent settlements. Saunders assembled a team, geomorphologists, luminescence specialists, botanists, and ran the tests properly. 25 radiocarbon dates, 6 luminescence dates, measuring when buried sand grains were last exposed to sunlight before they were sealed inside the mound fill. The results, published in the journal Science in 1997, were unambiguous. Construction at Watson Break began around 3500 BCE. Minor earthworks first, then, a few centuries later, major mound building that continued in stages for hundreds of years. The paper's own language was blunt. The site predated other known North American mound complexes with earthen enclosures by 1900 years. That number is worth sitting with. 1900 years older than anything comparable that had been dated at the time. Built roughly 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza existed. 1,000 years before Stonehenge's sarsen stones were raised. Built by people who left behind fired clay cooking balls, deer antler tools, distinctively notched stone points, archaeologists now call Evans points, and 11 mounds of packed earth, moved basket load by basket load, by hand, with no draft animals, no wheels, and no agriculture. It broke the rule. Monuments didn't require farms and kings after all. They required something else: motive, cooperation, and time. Nobody has fully settled on why these hunter-gatherers built something this large. Some researchers argue the site was a seasonal gathering place where scattered groups met, traded, and renewed alliances, families arriving on foot and by dugout canoe from many miles in every direction, hauling basket loads of river-bottom clay up an unfinished slope beside people they might see only once a year. Others think it marked territory or served as high ground above seasonal floodwaters. The debate has never fully disappeared, but the fact of construction, the sheer physical fact that it happened, stopped being in question after 1997. Today, Watson Break looks almost nothing like the LSU mounds. There are no tailgates here, no cardboard sleds, no crowds. Part of the site sits on state land, part on private property, quietly held together by a preservation arrangement that keeps it away from plows and pipelines. A structure that may have single-handedly rewritten the origin of monument building in North America sits behind private fences, visited mostly by researchers, while 30 miles away, a disputed pretender to its title gets climbed on by drunk football fans every autumn Saturday. Watson Break was not alone for long. A two-mound complex called Hedgepeth, roughly 40 miles away, produced its own layered surprise. Charcoal beneath one mound dated to around 2888 BCE, while a soil sample from underneath that same mound came back even older, closer to 4930 BCE. These hunter-gatherer societies weren't building once and walking away. They kept returning to the same ground across centuries, treating certain places as significant long after the first basket of dirt was dumped. Centuries later, the same region produced something even stranger. At Poverty Point, roughly 2,000 years after Watson Break, late archaic builders raised a massive earthwork known as Mound A. Researchers Anthony Ortman and T.R. Kidder calculated it may have gone up in as little as 90 days. An enormous volume of dirt moved fast enough that the builders would have had to work straight through the region's rainy season without a single layer washing away. Kidder later put the labor in blunt, modern terms. The builders moved roughly 140,000 dump truckloads of earth, without horses, without wheels, without a single beast of burden. Excavators there also found stone tools and raw materials that had traveled hundreds of miles to reach the site. evidence of a trade network stretching far beyond anything a small, isolated hunter-gatherer band could organize alone. Poverty Point earned UNESCO World Heritage status in 2014. It remains one of the clearest proofs that Louisiana's ancient earthwork tradition wasn't a one-time anomaly. It was a pattern, repeated for thousands of years by unrelated cultures using nothing but organized human labor. Mound building did not run in one smooth, unbroken line. Around 8,800 BCE, construction across the region stopped for more than 1,000 years. Some researchers connect that abandonment to a severe stretch of El Nino-driven flooding that would have made the river lowlands nearly unlivable for people trying to gather in large groups. It's a proposed explanation, not a proven one, but it means the story of Louisiana's mounds is a rise, a collapse, centuries of silence, and then, at places like Poverty Point, a second rise entirely. Watson Break should have been the headline. It rewrote the timeline of the Americas a quarter century before the LSU mounds made global news. Instead, it became a footnote in most archaeology courses outside the region, respected, cited, and largely unknown to the public. Here's why that matters for the fight happening right now. If Watson Break had gotten the same attention, the same media cycle, the same viral older than the pyramids headlines the LSU mounds received in 2022, the story of ancient Louisiana might look completely different today. Instead, one of the most important archaeological discoveries in North American history sat quietly proven for 25 years, while a newer, shakier claim absorbed all the oxygen. And Watson Break wasn't even the oldest site to get dated. It was just the one that survived long enough to be studied properly. This is the mound from the opening, the one William Hogg raced the bulldozers to save. Archaeologists called it Monte Sano. He didn't get much time. 3 days, a small crew, and a site that had waited thousands of years to be studied properly. They dug what they could, recorded what they could, and then the machines arrived. Monte Sano is gone now. Not damaged, not partially preserved behind glass in some regional museum. Gone. Flattened for a road that thousands of cars drive over every day without a single sign to mark what used to be underneath. What survived were field notes, salvaged artifacts, and a single radiocarbon date, obtained years after the mound itself no longer existed, roughly 6,200 years before present, around 4,500 BCE, older than Watson Break, possibly the oldest dated mound in North America, dated too late and too briefly to save it. Think about that sequence for a second. A 3-day salvage dig, a bulldozer, and a radiocarbon result that arrived after the evidence was already destroyed. The state didn't destroy Monte Sano because officials didn't care about history. They destroyed it because, in 1967, almost nobody understood what they were looking at. Hunter-gatherers weren't supposed to build monuments. So a 5,000-year-old mound looked, to most people at the time, like just another hill in the way of a highway. That mistake didn't happen only once. Frenchman's Bend, another Middle Archaic mound complex not far from Watson Break, lost its tallest mound to looters who came through with a bulldozer, searching for artifacts to sell rather than history to preserve. What survived was only saved because archaeologists moved fast, and because a sympathetic developer agreed to work around what was left, instead of building over it. Even nature has come close to erasing the record. At a site called Conley, along Loggy Bayou, thousands of years of Middle Archaic habitation lay buried under river silt until the bank itself began to erode and expose it. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains at roughly 7,500 to 8,000 years old, among the earliest human burials found anywhere in Louisiana. Louisiana, it turns out, has been quietly losing its oldest monuments for as long as anyone has known they existed, which raises an uncomfortable question hanging over the LSU dispute. If the title oldest structure in the Americas really is up for grabs, does anyone in a position of power actually treat these places like it matters? Or does that title only start to matter once a headline says so? That question is exactly why both claims, Watson-Brake's proven record and LSU's disputed one, are finally getting the kind of scrutiny they should have gotten decades ago. To understand why archaeologists are fighting over a gap of 5,000 years, you have to understand what the two dating methods actually measured, and why one is far easier to trust than the other. Radiocarbon dating, in simple terms, works because living things absorb a radioactive form of carbon while they're alive, and that carbon starts decaying at a steady, measurable rate the moment they die. Measure how much is left in a piece of charcoal, wood, or bone, and you can calculate roughly how long ago that organism died. It isn't perfect, but it has been tested and cross-checked for 70 years. When Saunders' team ran 25 separate radiocarbon dates at Watson-Brake, and those dates lined up consistently with the layered soil evidence and with 6 independent luminescence dates measuring when buried sand last saw sunlight, that wasn't one lucky test. That was multiple independent methods run by multiple specialists converging on the same answer. That kind of agreement is about as close to bulletproof as archaeology gets. The 2022 LSU claim used a different approach, and a riskier one. Elwood's team measured magnetic susceptibility, tracking subtle changes in the magnetic properties of soil layers, often linked to ancient burning events, layer by layer down through the mounds, a jagged line on a lab screen, spiking wherever the ancient ground had once been scorched or disturbed. Then they radiocarbon dated organic material found inside those layers, burned plant ash and phytoliths, the microscopic silica structures that form inside plant cells and survive long after the plant itself has decayed. From that combination, they built a timeline stretching back roughly 11,000 years for the start of Mound B. It was a striking result, especially given that 3 decades of prior coring and geophysical surveys on those same 2 mounds had never once suggested anything close to it. Here's the problem, and it's the same problem McGimpsey's rebuttal zeroed in on. Radiocarbon dating tells you how old the organic material is. It does not automatically tell you when that material was piled into a mound. If ancient builders scooped up soil that already contained older burned plant matter, material from a fire that happened centuries or millennia before construction even started, and used that soil as fill, then testing the burned material dates the fire, not the mound. It's the difference between dating a brick and dating the building it was used to construct decades or centuries later. The brick can be older than the wall. Nobody would call that suspicious in an ordinary building. In an 11,000-year headline, it changes everything. McGimpsey's team didn't invent this concern out of nowhere. They pointed to earlier work at the same site, 4 separate radiocarbon ages, obtained back in 2009, ranging between roughly 6,800 and 4,800 years before present. Those 4 dates fit comfortably within the broader pattern already established at Watson-Brake, Monte Sano, and the other Middle Archaic mound sites across the state. Old, genuinely paradigm-breaking, but not 11,000 years old. Rebecca Saunders, a co-author on the rebuttal and no relation to Joe Saunders of Watson-Brake, argued that this earlier, more conservative range had already been accepted as a reasonable estimate before the 2022 paper pushed the number back by thousands of years. The detail that makes this sting is personal. Saunders had partnered with Elwood himself on an earlier geophysical survey of these same 2 mounds back in 2018, mapping them with resistivity and radar, years before either of them imagined publishing rival papers about how old the ground beneath their own equipment actually was. Tulane archaeologist Chris Rodning voiced similar doubts about the newer dating's accuracy. This is where the story stops being about who's right and starts being about who's exposed. Elwood's team are geologists, experts in reading soil and sediment, not in the archaeological record of how ancient people built things. Their critics are archaeologists, experts in human behavior and material culture, but not in the physics of magnetic susceptibility. Neither side has accused the other of dishonesty. Nobody is claiming fraud. What's on the table is something more familiar and in some ways more uncomfortable. A headline-ready number that skipped past the kind of cross-checking the quieter Watson Brake study went through for years before it was ever published. There's a reason a claim like this is tempting to publish quickly, and it isn't dishonesty. A department earns more attention and prestige from announcing the oldest structure in the Americas than from confirming once again that a familiar site is merely 5,000 years old. None of that proves the LSU number is wrong, but it explains why a spectacular claim can outrun the cautious cross-checking older studies, like Watson Brake, went through as routine. And here's the reversal that should sting a little. The claim that made international news, 11,000 years, oldest structure in the hemisphere aligned to a star, is the one still standing on shaky ground. The claim that never made international news, Watson Brake, dated the hard way, cross-checked 6 different ways, has quietly held up for almost 30 years without a serious challenge. What looked like scientific closure in 2022, a triumphant press release, a new record, global coverage, didn't close anything. It opened a live, ongoing dispute that, as of now, has no final answer. New optically stimulated luminescence testing is underway, aimed at redating the LSU mounds using yet another independent method, this time measuring exactly when the sand grains inside the mound fill were last exposed to light before they were buried. The same basic principle Saunders' team used at Watson Brake 25 years earlier. Until those results come back, the 11,000-year number remains a claim, not a settled fact. And the true oldest, most defensible monument built by ancient hands in North America may not be the one every headline currently credits. That does not prove the LSU mounds are young. It does not prove Elwood's team got it wrong. It proves something narrower, and in some ways more unsettling, that the title of oldest structure has become a contest nobody has actually finished decided, for now, more by press coverage than by consensus. Which raises the deeper question underneath all of it. If archaeologists can't even agree on how old one carefully studied mound is, on a protected, well-funded university campus, with dozens of researchers involved, what does that say about the sites nobody has studied that closely at all? The ones under a highway, the ones under a golf course, the ones a farmer plowed flat decades ago without ever calling anyone. That question isn't hypothetical. Louisiana has already lost most of the evidence it would need to answer it. Chip McGimpsey, the same state archaeologist who challenged the LSU dating, has been blunt about the scale of the loss. Hundreds of mounds, he has said, have been destroyed by landowners, farmers, and corporations, flattened for fields, quarried for filled dirt, bulldozed for development, paved for roads, before anyone thought to test them. Most of those sites never got 3 rushed days like Montesano did. Most of them left behind no radiocarbon date, no field notes, no salvaged artifacts at all. Just a shape a farmer noticed once, and then plowed flat the following spring. Montesano is the clearest example, mostly because someone happened to be watching in time to write it down. It is nowhere close to the only one. The scale of that loss changes how you have to read the current fight. This isn't just 2 teams of scientists arguing over a number for the sake of academic pride. It's a dispute happening in a state that has already proven, repeatedly, that it will pave over 5,000-year-old monuments before anyone in power realizes what they're looking at. Every year, the LSU dating question stays unresolved is another year those 2 mounds sit exposed to foot traffic, erosion, tailgating crowds, and the same casual disregard that erased Montesano and nearly erased Frenchman's Bend. Contrast that with Poverty Point, a couple of hours away. Once its scientific importance was firmly established, the state protected it, built it a visitor center, and pushed for the UNESCO recognition it now holds. Poverty Point proves Louisiana can protect a mound when the political will is there. Montesano proves what happens when that will arrives too late. The 2 campus mounds at LSU are caught somewhere in between, famous enough to argue about internationally not yet protected enough to stop the erosion happening under everyone's feet. That disregard is happening in real time on camera every football season. The LSU campus mounds are protected on paper, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, a designation meant to signal permanence and respect. In practice, the mounds have spent decades absorbing damage from students sliding down their slopes on cardboard and coolers, from tailgate parties pitched directly on top of them, from ordinary foot traffic wearing grooves into slopes that took human beings hundreds of years to raise by hand. A monument possibly older than the pyramids, sitting exposed on a college quad, eroding a little more with every football season. There's a second layer to this that rarely makes the headlines. Every mound in this story was built by the ancestors of Native American communities who are still here. Communities whose history has too often been treated as a research subject rather than a living inheritance. That's part of what made the 2022 rebuttal sting. It wasn't only about a number being wrong. It was about a team of geologists publishing a sweeping claim about the oldest structure built by ancient indigenous hands, without fully engaging the archaeologists and communities who had already spent decades studying that exact question. A number on a chart is never just a number here. It's a claim about someone else's family history, made from thousands of years away. There's real weight riding on how this gets resolved. If the new testing confirms Elwood's original number, the LSU campus mounds become one of the most significant archaeological sites on the planet. If it confirms McGimpsey's more conservative range, the title of oldest verified monument in the Americas quietly returns to Watson Brake, a site most Americans have still never heard of. Either outcome should change how these places get funded and protected. So far, neither outcome has. So where does that leave the mystery? Not solved. Genuinely, honestly, unresolved, which, in this case, might be the most accurate ending available. New optically stimulated luminescence results could still validate part of Elwood's original claim, or they could confirm McGimpsey's skepticism and push the LSU mounds back into the same range of 5,000 to 7,000 years that the site's earlier studies suggested. Either way, one fact will not change. Decades before this fight made headlines, Watson Brake already proved that ancient hunter-gatherers in Louisiana were capable of building monumental earthworks without agriculture, without cities, and without kings, a discovery that rewrote the assumptions archaeologists carried about the origins of monument building itself. That answer has held for almost 30 years. It never needed a viral headline to be true. Somewhere north of Baton Rouge, past the airport, there's a stretch of open ground where nothing marks what used to stand there. No plaque, no fence, no sign explaining that a 5,000-year-old mound, radiocarbon dated to around 4,500 BCE, sat on that spot until a highway crew needed 3 days and a set of bulldozers to make room for traffic. Drivers pass over it every day, at highway speed, with no idea that the ground beneath the asphalt once held one of the oldest structures human beings ever built on this continent. Somewhere in a records office, a folder still holds William Hogg's 3 days of field notes, the closest thing left to a eulogy for a monument nobody had time to understand before it was gone. And back on campus, this Saturday, there will be another football game. Students will climb the 2 grass mounds again, the same way they always have, spreading blankets, cracking coolers, sliding down slopes that a 2022 study says might be 11,000 years old, and that Louisiana's own state archaeologist says might not be. Nobody checking tickets at the gate will mention any of it. The mounds will just sit there, quietly absorbing another year of foot traffic, still waiting on a test that hasn't finished, still carrying a title nobody has actually earned yet. Somewhere between the confident version on a 2022 press release and the empty field where Monte Sano used to stand, the true age of the oldest monument in the Americas is still buried. A lab is still running tests on it right now. This week, this month, measuring grains of sand for a light they haven't seen in thousands of years. Until those results come back, 2 grass-covered hills on a college campus will keep doing what they have done for centuries, whether anyone believes the number or not. they'll keep standing. And for now, that's staying the only thing anyone can prove.